What's going on, Tide fans? Welcome to lucky episode number 13 of Crimson Tide Today. I'm Zack Aitken. So, the wait for Alabama football, it's getting shorter by the day, and as we move closer to the start of fall camp, every update out of Tuscaloosa, it becomes a little louder. Whether it's what we're hearing from the practice field, comments from the coaching staff, or the latest developments around the program, there's no shortage of storylines to follow. We've got a lot to cover on today's show as we continue our countdown to another season of Alabama football. If you've enjoyed the content, be sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and drop your thoughts in the comments. Let's start the opening drive. So, Alabama, they picked up another major recruiting win this past weekend, and while it's a commitment that won't impact the field for a few years, it's still turning heads across college football. The Crimson Tide have landed a commitment from four-star edge prospect Tyser Young out of Delaware, and that's giving Kalen DeBoer and his staff yet another blue-chip piece in what's becoming a very impressive 2028 recruiting class. Young, he chose Alabama over major programs that included Miami, Oregon, Ohio State, Georgia, and Rutgers. According to the Rivals industry rankings, he's considered one of the top linebackers or edge rushers in the 2028 class. Now, I know what some fans are thinking. Tyser Young, he's a 2028 recruit. Why should we be paying attention to this right now? The answer is simple. Recruiting momentum, it matters. Over the last several months, Alabama's 2027 recruiting class, it's been a hot topic among fans. The class currently sits lower in the rankings than what most Crimson Tide fans have become accustomed to seeing, and that's created plenty of discussion about the direction of recruiting under head coach Kalen DeBoer. But while some people have focused on the 2027 rankings, Alabama staff, they've quietly been building something special with the 2028 cycle. Young's commitment, it's another example of that. He's the type of prospect that Alabama has built championship defenses around for years. At 6'2", at around 220 pounds, he already possesses excellent size for a young edge rusher. His film shows a player who can rush the passer, chase down ball carriers, and make plays in space. Whether Alabama ultimately develops him into an edge rusher or an outside linebacker or, a versatile hybrid defender, the athletic traits are very obvious. And this commitment, it's not just happening in a vacuum. The 2028 class, it already features several highly regarded prospects, including quarterbacks Kingston Preer and Charles Stark Jr., linebackers Dustin Henry and Raekwon Butler, and other talented recruits like blue chip offensive lineman Anthony Blaylock Jr. And that's showing that this staff is already building strength on both sides of the football. But what's interesting about this is the timing. Many fan bases around the country are questioning Alabama's recruiting approach after the slower pace in the 2027 cycle. But with commitments like Tyser Young, it suggests that the staff may be taking the longer view. Instead of chasing every headline today, Alabama appears focused on building relationships with elite underclassmen and positioning itself for another top-ranked class in the future. The reaction from Alabama fans has reflected that. Many supporters have been pointing to the growing 2028 class as evidence that DeBoer and his staff, they have a plan and they remain one of the nation's elite recruiting operations. Alabama is currently ranked number 1 in the 2028 recruiting rankings. So the bottom line is this. Alabama just landed one of the top defensive prospects in the 2028 class, and the Crimson Tide, they've continued to build momentum with acquiring the nation's best young talent. Will Tyser Young eventually become the next great Alabama linebacker? It's far too early to know that, but we do know this. Alabama just beat out some of the biggest brands in college football for his commitment, and that's another sign that the Crimson Tide remain a major force on the recruiting trail. For a player who still has multiple years of high school football ahead of him, that's a pretty impressive start towards his journey in Tuscaloosa. Moving on, one of the biggest talking points coming out of SEC media days, it wasn't a player, wasn't a coach, or it wasn't even a quarterback battle. It was where Alabama landed in the SEC preseason poll. And for the first time in a long time, the Crimson Tide are looking up at several teams in the conference rankings. The SEC recently released its annual preseason media poll, and Alabama was picked to finish 6th in the conference. That's the program's lowest preseason SEC ranking since 2008, when Nick Saban was entering just his second season in Tuscaloosa. Alabama also only received 3 votes to win the SEC championship, which is the fewest the program has received since 2009. Ahead of Alabama in the poll were schools like Georgia, Texas, Ole Miss, Texas A&M, and LSU. The Crimson Tide were just ahead of Oklahoma, Tennessee, and Florida. Georgia was the clear favorite to win the conference, while Texas was picked to finish second. Now, if you're an Alabama fan, your first reaction might have been disbelief. Sixth? Really? This is a program that has spent most of the last 15 years dominating the SEC. Alabama fans, they're used to seeing the Crimson Tide picked near the very top of the preseason poll, not sitting outside of the conference's top five. But at the same time, you can understand why some of the voters are cautious. Alabama are still replacing key pieces from last year's roster. The quarterback competition remains one of the biggest stories of fall camp, with Keelan Russell and Austin Mack battling for the job. And there's few questions about, the offensive line, if they can come together, and whether the running game can take a significant step forward. On the other hand, there's also plenty of reason for optimism. This is going to be year 3 under Coach Kalen DeBoer. The coaching staff has had time to build a roster in its image. The defense returns several proven key playmakers, and Alabama continues to recruit at an all-time level. The talent on this roster, it's still good enough to compete with anybody in the country. And let's be honest, being picked 6th, it may not be the worst thing in the world. For years, Alabama entered every season with a giant target on its back. Expectations were national championship or bust. But this season, it feels a little different. The pressure from outside of the program has eased somewhat unless you're a member of the national media, and the Crimson Tide, they'll have an opportunity to play with something to prove. History also suggests that preseason polls, they don't always determine championships. The irony is that last time Alabama was viewed this skeptically, it was back in 2008. That team started the season outside of the national spotlight, but they won 12 games, they captured the SEC West, and they helped launch one of the greatest dynasties in college football history. Now, nobody's saying that this team it's not going to start another Nick Saban era run. I'm not going to predict that, but it's a reminder that preseason predictions are exactly that. They're predictions. What matters is what happens when the games begin. So the question for Alabama fans is very simple. Is 6th place a fair assessment of where this team stands entering 2026? Or is the rest of the SEC overlooking a Crimson Tide team that could surprise a lot of people this fall? We'll find out soon enough, but one thing is certain. Alabama isn't used to being doubted, and that can make this season very interesting. Nick Saban, he may not be coaching Alabama anymore, but when he talks about college football, people still listen. He has a very loud voice. Recently, Saban, he shared his outlook on the 2026 conference race and naming the 2 teams he believes are at the top of the league while also identifying several others that have a legitimate chance to make a run at the SEC championship. According to Saban, Georgia and Texas are the 2 teams that enter the year as the favorites to win the SEC. Considering the talent on both rosters and the success of those programs they've had recently, it's hard to argue with that assessment. Georgia, it remains one of the nation's most talented teams under Kirby Smart, and while Texas, it continues to load up on elite recruiting classes, and they also have high expectations as well. But Nick Saban, he didn't stop there. He also pointed to other teams who have a realistic chance to compete in what could be one of the deepest SEC races that we've seen in years. And that's just a reminder that this conference, it's no longer a league where, 1 or 2 teams dominate the conversation. Week after week, there's going to be playoff caliber matchups. And that's what brings us back to Alabama. The Crimson Tide, they entered the 2026 season in a very interesting position. For the first time in a long time, Alabama isn't being viewed as the clear favorite. As we already talked about, the SEC media, they recently picked the Tide to finish 6th in the conference, which is the lowest in preseason projections that Alabama has received since the early years of the Saban era. Alabama, they also only received a handful of votes to win the SEC championship. That means Alabama's entering this season with something it hasn't had in the last 2 decades. They have doubt. Now, some fans, they may take that personally, but others may see that realistic. The truth is probably somewhere in the middle, though. There are legitimate questions about this team. Like we mentioned, the quarterback battle remains unsolved. We have the offensive line who's trying to take a major step forward after a disappointing rushing season, and several young players will be asked to contribute immediately. But there's also reasons to believe that Alabama can outperform expectations. Like I said, this is year 3 under the DeBoer era. The coaching staff has had time to build depth, develop younger talent, and establish its culture that it wants throughout the program. Alabama's continuing to bring in high caliber players, and the roster is still loaded with SEC caliber athletes all over the place. In some ways, this season it's going to feel like a proving ground. Can Alabama reestablish itself and be the team that everyone expects at the top of the SEC? Can this offense become more consistent? Can this quarterback be a true difference maker, which is something Alabama fans have been used to for the last 10 or 15 years? And can the Tide show that they're ready to challenge Georgia or Texas for conference supremacy? Those are questions that are going to define the season. The interesting thing is Nick Saban, he didn't rule out Alabama. He simply acknowledged what most people around college football already believe. Georgia and Texas, they entered this year with the fewest questions, and that's 100% true. But college football seasons, they're not going to be one in July. They're one in September, October, and November. Alabama fans, they know that better than anyone. So while Saban may have Georgia and Texas at the top of the conference entering the year, don't assume that means Alabama's going to be out of the picture. If the quarterback situation gets settled, the offensive line improves, and if this roster develops the way that the coaching staff believes it can, the Crimson Tide can end up being one of the biggest stories in college football by the end of the season. And if that happens, nobody in Tuscaloosa is going to care what a preseason prediction said. To put a bow on today's show, let's do a player preview. Today's edition, it focuses on a guy who could end up being one of the most important players on Alabama's entire defense in 2026, and that's safety Keon Sabb. When people think about Alabama's defense, names like Bray Hubbard, Xavier Brown, and Caleb Woodson, they get a lot of attention. But if the Crimson Tide are going to have one of the best secondaries in college football, Keon Sabb will be right in the middle of it. Let's start with the basics. Sabb is listed at 6'1" and 208 pounds, and that's giving him the size and physicality that Alabama looks for at the safety position. He's big enough to support the run, but he's athletic enough to cover receivers and tight ends in space. His path to Alabama, it was also pretty interesting. Coming out of IMG Academy in Florida, Sabb was one of the top defensive backs in the 2022 recruiting class. He signed with Michigan and spent 2 seasons with the Wolverines, helping Michigan win a national championship during the 2023 season. After Nick Saban retired and Kalen DeBoer took over at Alabama, Sabb entered the transfer portal and eventually chose the Crimson Tide. The transfer turned out to be a huge addition for Alabama. In his first season with the Tide in 2024, Sabb immediately stepped into a starting role at safety. Before suffering a career or season-ending injury midway through the year, he recorded 39 tackles, 2 picks, 4 pass breakups, and just 7 starts. He was playing some of the best football in the defense before the injury cut his season short. And to be honest, Sabb's play, it was making me forget who Caleb Downs was and that he departed for the Buckeyes. Then came 2025, and Sabb showed exactly why Alabama wanted him in Tuscaloosa. He started all 15 games and finished with 54 tackles, 2.5 tackles for loss, 1 sack, 1 pick, 3 pass breakups, and a quarterback hurry. But more importantly, he gave Alabama stability on the back end of the defense, and he became one of the veteran leaders of the secondary. What makes Sabb such a valuable player is his versatility. He's not just a center field safety who sits deep and waits for the ball to come to him. He's comfortable with playing near the line of scrimmage, helping against the run, covering tight ends, and blitzing when needed. He can do a little bit of everything, which is exactly what Kane Womack wants from his defensive backs. Analysts and fans, they've consistently pointed to his combination of physicality and coverage ability as one of his biggest strengths. The other thing that stands out about Sabb is experience. This isn't a player who's still trying to figure things out. He's played in big games at Michigan, he's played in the college football playoff, and he's started games in the SEC. He's seen just about every offensive system that you can imagine. That experience is invaluable for an Alabama defense that has national championship aspirations. Heading into 2026, expectations are high for the Crimson Tide secondary. Many analysts consider Alabama's defensive back group as one of the best in the SEC, and Sabb, he's a major reason why. Alongside Bray Hubbard and a talented group of corners, he'll be expected to help lead a defense that could carry Alabama through the tough conference matchups this year. The bottom line is this. Keon Sabb may not receive the same national level attention as some of Alabama's other stars, but he has all the tools to be one of the most important players on the roster. He's got the size, the experience, the production, and the versatility that NFL scouts love. If Alabama is going to make a run at the SEC championship and a college football playoff berth in 2026, don't be surprised if Keon Sabb is one of the biggest reasons why. So guys, that's going to do it for today's show. As always, let me know what you think down in the comments. What topics did I miss? I would love to hear y'all's thoughts. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of our Alabama football coverage as we're getting closer to kickoff. You can also follow me on X and Instagram at ZAitken7 for more Crimson Tide news, recruiting updates, and analysis throughout the week. Thanks for watching, and until next time, Roll Tide.